Welcome back to the B Block, our second section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news. I'm Alaina Pinto. There is a Central American nation that is moving forward with their medical cannabis reforms. The Ministry of Health in Costa Rica announced regulations to start the production and sale of medicinal products that will take place at pharmacies. The regulations introduced outline administrative requirements, health and patient registration, product specs, and advertising. Only doctors will be able to prescribe the product to patients. Meanwhile, there's a European nation that is ready to launch a full-blown adult use program, and our European correspondent, Ben Stevens, has the story of Switzerland's reform that could be launched in 2026.
With Business of Cannabis with this week's European Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Switzerland has catapulted itself into pole position to become the first European country to launch a fully fledged adult use cannabis market. This week, a new draft for a federal law, which would enable citizens to grow, buy, possess and consume cannabis, was passed with a convincing majority of 14-9. The National Council's Social Security and Health Committee, in an increasingly common justification for attempts at cannabis reform across Europe, cited public health and youth protection for their ambitious proposals, and said that cannabis consumption is a social reality. Should this draft be adopted, which experts believe could happen by next year, Swiss citizens would be able to cultivate up to 3 plants at home, as already seen in Malta and Germany. Crucially, however, they would also be able to purchase cannabis for recreational purposes from licensed retailers and online. As discussed last week, a similar bill is being pushed through Parliament in the Czech Republic. However, a crucial difference is that Switzerland is not part of the European Union, whereas the Czech Republic is. This would potentially make the passage of the bill a smoother process, though legislators will still have to contend with international regulations surrounding the free movement of goods, as it is still part of the single market. This has been a sticking point for previous attempts to legalise cannabis in countries like Germany and Luxembourg. Elsewhere, the Italian hemp industry has received unexpected support from the centre-right Forza Italia party, strengthening its position against an existential threat from its own government. This comes after the European Commission also confirmed that it is set to launch an investigation into the legality of the government's efforts to render all commercial activities surrounding industrial hemp illegal. To clarify, industrial hemp in this context means cannabis with a THC content of less than 0.2%, meaning it is entirely non-intoxicating. Should this inflammatory bill be imposed, it is expected to lead to the closure of 3,000 businesses and the loss of 15,000 jobs supported by the hemp industry. While the industry is still fighting for its survival, the tide appears to be turning in its favour. That's all for this week's European Cannabis Report. I'm Ben Stevens, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the most active international companies in cannabis is Curaleaf. The publicly traded multi-state operator already has a sizable interest in the European market, and they are positioning themselves to be a major player in that continent as the fight for acceptance continues. Here's our man, High on Wall Street, Doug Miller.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In the next few months, cannabis testing labs in New Jersey, they will be subject to new labeling requirements and must obey new action limits under recently approved rules. For the first time, New Jersey now has its own testing standards after having followed Maryland's cannabis testing protocols since 2021. Under the new rules approved by the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission, the CRC, on February 18th, the maximum batch size for usable cannabis is now 33.07 pounds. That's down from 100 pounds. And the product labels must include content of THCA, CBDA, CBG, CBGA, and CBN, and of course THC and CBD. And there's also new action limits for a long list of contaminants, the CRC noted. So let's look at Curaleaf. They've been operating in New Jersey, and they're the largest MSO. So let's see how their stock chart looks. It's trading around $1.41, and it's been way down for some time now. So I've been watching it to see if it can start moving up, because it is trying to set up. So I'll keep an eye on it and keep you guys posted. And remember, trade smart, lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Over the past few weeks, we've told you stories about a number of state governors and legal states who want to tap into their cannabis businesses for even more taxes. That is something the industry is extremely fearful of considering. It is already overtaxed and overregulated, while the illicit market thrives and the hemp market continues to grow. Ohio may only be 6 months into their adult use launch, but their governor, Mike DeWine, is not making any friends or gaining much support for his wish to have their new tax revenue stream from the sale of cannabis increase. Here's Christina Brisson with the Ohio Report, sponsored by Yellow Labs, with 40 dispensaries in that state and more coming to Massachusetts.
In Willow Creek, Rory, renowned for birdwatching, embraced nature's elegance. Preparing for his woodland sojourn, he used grape-focused THC mist from Yellow Labs. Each spritz honed his senses, capturing avian beauty. Immersed in the forest symphony, Rory's lens froze vibrant moments. Emerging at twilight, gratitude filled him for the mist's clarity. Recalling, "Find Yellow Labs near you." Rory ordered more of his mist from...
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last week I mentioned Governor DeWine and the proposed changes he was wanting to make, and in his new budget he's suggesting that we increase the tax on adult use cannabis and then turn around and use that money to build jails and police training, instead of using it for the various community funds. This as Ohio sales exceed over $319 million. But in other good news, this last weekend at a Cincinnati suburban farmers market, they had 30 vendors set up, and you're allowed to buy seeds, immature plants, and clones. Hope to see more of that to come. Thank you. I'm Christina Brisson with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Ohio Cannabis Report is supported by Yellow Labs and Better Ways to THC.com. Search for Yellow Labs near me and find one of 40 dispensaries in Ohio carrying these amazing mists and creams.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. More news from the Arizona State Capitol this week. A bill restricting cannabis advertising passed the House with bipartisan support. The legislation aims to protect kids by banning ads targeting under 21s and limiting billboard placements. Meanwhile, Senator T.J. Shope has done a 180 on hemp-derived cannabinoids. After some education, he's now pushing for regulation rather than prohibition. Speaking of education, there were 2 recent cannabis education events in Tucson. The Elevate Your Knowledge AZ Cannabis and Adaptive Sports panel, sponsored by Trulieve, included athletes and Trulief's medical director. Discussion centered around cannabis's role in training, recovery, and managing sports injuries. Green Culture ED also held a responsible cannabis vendor training in the Old Pueblo. In a similar vein, Arizona public radio station KJZZ is hosting a new podcast, Reefer Growing Madness. It takes listeners behind the scenes of a massive indoor marijuana grow operation in Arizona, tracking the plant's journey from clone to consumption. The series explores the history of cannabis in the U.S. and offers an inside look at the modern marijuana industry. And lastly, the sale of THC-infused drinks at Arizona's Total Wine & More has sparked controversy. While Total Wine believes the sales are legal under the 2018 Farm Bill, dispensaries argue it creates an uneven playing field by bypassing Arizona's cannabis safety regulations. The debate continues as lawmakers and industry stakeholders grapple with regulating this new frontier in cannabis commerce. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Minnesota's cannabis market is taking off with tribal nations leading the way. The Prairie Island Indian community just opened a huge 13-acre cannabis farm under its Island Pezzi brand, producing over 10,000 pounds of cannabis. Other tribes like Red Lake, White Earth, Mille Lacs are expanding too, especially since state licensing is delayed. The White Earth Band of Chippewa is making big moves, opening a dispensary in Moorhead next month, then another in St. Cloud this spring. The Moorhead shop will be Minnesota's first off-reservation dispensary once an agreement is locked in. Well, Big One, Mesquite, White Earth's cannabis brand, started in 2023. CEO Zach Wilson wants to expand into Mankato plus Rochester next. Right now, only tribal lands can sell recreational cannabis. White Earth plus Red Lake got a head start by launching medical sales back in 2020. Minnesota legalized marijuana in 2023, but lawsuits delayed licensing, so retail shops won't open until 2025. The state scrapped its lottery system in December after the cannabis director resigned last month. New lotteries are expected this spring, but it could still take months before shops open. In Nevada, on February 20th, PBS's Nevada Week, the cannabis economy featured experts breaking down cannabis issues in the state. Here's what you need to know. 31% of Nevada's cannabis market is illegal, unregulated. High taxes make legal marijuana expensive. Tourists often buy from illegal sellers they find on Google or social media without realizing it. So what's being done? Agencies like the Cannabis Compliance Board plus law enforcement are working on better enforcement. Also, tourist-friendly delivery services and more. The goal? Make Las Vegas the gold standard for legal cannabis, just like they did with casinos. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B Block, but we have more reports from legal adult use states from all over the country, including Virginia's Joe Parsons. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
President Trump's nominee to head the DEA, Terry Cole, will play an important role in the future of the industry and being handed